As many people know, Last Epoch is being fully released on February 21st, and with its release is coming the new mastery, the Falconer. This is the final mastery for the Rogue class, and it's been long awaited by a lot of people in the community. On February 8th, Maxroll gave us the first look at the Falconer class, and I'm going to go ahead here and we're going to talk through the class a little bit, give a brief idea on how the class works and each individual skill. And then to top it all off, I have a bit of a build guide, not build guide, but a build concept that I believe I'm going to use to level the class on release on the 21st. So I'm going to jump over now, and we're going to get started looking through each of the skills. The first skill we have here is Falconry. This skill has two parts. First, summoning your Falcon, which is a persistent minion that is invulnerable to damage, and it will fly around and attack nearby enemies, dealing damage or applying ailments. The second part of the skill is an active portion called Falcon Strikes. It's the Falcon's main ability, and it will fly around to different enemies nearby and deal rapid attacks to a bunch of different enemies in the area. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at the passive tree quickly. So one of the main nodes here that changes the ability at its core is Toxic Airdrop. This will make your Falcon drop acid flasks for you. So you could potentially use this to just scale acid flask damage and just use your Falcon almost as a support to deliver these attacks. Another node that changes the skill at its core is Falcon Strikes. Instead of your Falcon dashing around in a semi-random pattern to different enemies near you, it changes the active ability to go in a straight line in front of you. Down in the bottom right, we have Train to Hunt. Go for the eyes and Exposed Weakness. These cause your Falcon to scale its damage based on your stats that you have applying to yourself. As for numbers, we don't know how these are going to end up. We have to wait for the patch notes that we are going to be seeing before the game launches. That being said, they have a lot of potential as just a really solid way to scale the Falcon's damage. Finally, we'll touch on Rending Talons. This is one of the other nodes that really stuck out to me, that causes your Falcon to apply ailments that you have based on your gear. So if you have chance to shred armor on your gear, your Falcon now can shred armor as well. Depending on how these numbers end up, this has a lot of potential to either cause the Falcon to do a lot more damage through shredding armor or applying bleed, or just using the Falcon as a really solid support for your other skills in applying stuff like shred resistances or frailty or even chill. There's a lot of potential with different ways to build this skill, and I think that is really, really cool, and I think they did a fantastic job with it. So now we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next skill. For our second skill here, we have Explosive Trap. If you're coming over to Last Epoch from Path of Exile, this trap skill might make you feel right at home inside this game. It is very similar to the trap skills that you can make within Path of Exile. So we'll take a quick look at it. So at its core, it is a standard trap skill. You throw a trap on the floor. If there's an enemy nearby it, or if an enemy walks over it, it will detonate after a short period of time and deal damage. Now, there's so much that you can do with the skill. You can convert it to cold damage instead of fire. You can convert it to lightning instead of fire. But that's just the basics. There's so much that you can look towards, like having it trigger detonating arrow, or having the trap summon ballistas for you so you don't have to manage your ballistas yourself. You can just run around and throw the traps. You can also have the trap's detonation have a chance to trigger more trap detonation and kind of get one of those infinite loops that you see in some games, depending on how much you could scale this or how much trap throwing attack speed you can get. You can even make it so that every time a trap detonates, it buffs your Falcon. And as we know, Falcon is kind of the core of the whole Falconer mastery. Finally, we'll quickly touch on Blast Rain. Blast Rain converts this from a throwing skill over to a bow skill. completely altering it and making it so that instead of throwing traps on the ground and moving away, you will instead rain traps down on your enemies and have them detonate. You combine that with the impact trigger node and they detonate immediately, and you can kind of have a skill very similar to Rain of Arrows from Path of Exile, or other bow skills in the game. Very cool, it has a lot of potential. I'm really looking forward to playing around with this skill on launch. Our third skill here is Net. At first I thought this was going to be a pretty boring skill, and then the more I looked into it, the more amazed I got with how much depth there is to this skill. At its core, it's very similar to Caitlyn's net trap from League of Legends. You shoot the net forward, and then you push yourself backwards a little bit, or you leap backwards, and it will slow the enemies that it hits, or immobilize them. But there is so much that you can do with this skill. You can use it to debuff the enemies considerably by reducing their physical damage dealt to you, adding stacks of frailty, making it so that they can't dodge the net, slowing them, and you can even make it so that they can't avoid crits or cannot dodge in general. This is so incredible because there are some current modifiers that could be changed with 1.0, but as far as we know right now, there is a modifier that makes it so that enemies are 100% crit avoid. That means if you are a crit-based build, you are doing a considerable amount less damage. This could fully solve this on its own. But that's not just it. It's not just a support skill. You could also go towards the bottom here, and you can turn it into a trap. So now Net is going to be a trap. It's going to throw out, you can get a more wide area with that. And then you can also utilize it to trigger Puncture, which as a lot of people know, Puncture is a very strong leveling skill currently for applying bleed to a mass amount of enemies and giving you just a ridiculous amount of bleed chance. You can also go over here, and every time you cast Net, you also drop Caltrops, which will slow your enemies and potentially do a lot of other stuff that you can use through the passive tree. You can even make it drop Smoke Bomb for you. There's a lot of depth within this skill, even though it's as simple as just shooting a net forward. I feel like this is going to be a staple in a lot of Falconer builds, just for the sheer amount of utility that it can provide. Fourth, we have Aerial Assault. This is a traversal skill that is exclusive to the Falconer. Your Falcon will pick you up and carry you forward, and then when it drops you off, it will deal a burst of damage through feathers that it'll rain down on enemies within the area. There's a pretty decent amount that you can do with this skill, such as just reducing its cooldown to use it very frequently, which could just end up making it be a really strong traversal skill, just making you dash through your echoes or through the campaign very rapidly. That being said, there are some really key points here to be made, that you can make it so that it'll drop Umbral Blades when you finish casting it, which, as a lot of people who have played this game for a while know, one of the rogue's core builds that is very, very popular and very strong is based around Umbral Blades and Shadow Daggers, and it can apply that directly. It also has stuff such as Tactician here, which makes it so that it'll buff your ballista the more intelligence you have, to kind of lead towards a potential ballista build where you're stacking intelligence and just using that to increase damage to a ridiculous amount. There's so much more too, where you can make it so that this skill will buff you and your Falcon and make you guys deal more damage, or give you haste or frenzy. And then there's even ways to make it so that it heals you, or instead of healing you, you can convert that healing into ward, which to me kind of stands out for some of the low life builds that you see currently. Now, low life could be getting fixed as we move into 1.0, but we're not sure until we see the patch notes. You can make it drop Caltrops whenever you use it, and then can even make it spawn shadows for you. Shadows are a pretty common rogue skill that you see in a lot of builds, where it'll spawn a shadow that replicates certain skills that you use following it. Falconer brings forth something new called Shadow Falcons, which is very similar, but it's a little bit different. It causes it to have different interactions based on how you spec certain skills. very cool. I'm very excited to play with this just as a traversal skill, if nothing else, because I feel like you're going to be able to get the cooldown to a very low number and use it to really just move through the game at a rapid pace. Our final skill for the Falconer mastery is Dive Bomb. You command your Falcon to fly high up into the sky and then slam down on enemies, causing a lot of damage or causing different effects to happen based on how you built the skill. There's a surprising amount of depth to this tree, although it may not look like it at the start. This tree seems to have the most support for Shadow Falcons, which I think is going to be a really fun and cool mechanic to try and build around. So, as you can see here, Dive Bomb creates Shadow Falcons, so it's going to cause multiple Shadow Falcons to spawn, and they strike the location of your current shadows that you have that you might have spawned through different things like Shift. You can also make it so that if you Dive Bomb within, if you cast it within your Smoke Bomb, it will kind of echo the skill and cast it again right there, which can lead to some pretty crazy burst damage, potentially, for bosses if you're hitting it with the same skill twice, or potentially 3 or 4 times, depending on how this scales with multiple Shadow Falcons. It also has a pretty strong defensive component to it, in giving you multiple stacks of Dusk Shroud by itself. Dusk Shroud gives you a lot of Glancing Blow, and it's just a really solid buff that you can stack on yourself, especially with the other ways to get Glancing Blow that this mastery has, being a rogue. But that's not it. It's not just about the Falcon and the Shadow Falcons. You can also go ahead and you can make it trigger explosive traps that you have on the floor. So if you want to go ahead and you don't want to take the Blast Rain nodes that we talked about when we were going over Explosive Trap, you can have it make it so that every time you throw your traps, you will go ahead and cast Dive Bomb right on top of it, and it will trigger the trap and make it do more damage and explode in an increased area too. So it can really get that screen-wide coverage potentially, if that's something you're looking for. The other really cool portion of this that I like to see is this Incendiary Collision Bird Missile. Now, that's a long name for a passive point here, but it makes it so that if you cast Dive Bomb and it hits one of your decoys, it will automatically explode. Now, I'm not going to go over the build fully, but there is a build with explosive decoys that you can build into. Not necessarily a meta build, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a really cool concept, and it's honestly just a very funny build. And this honestly could make that build really strong. There's a lot of chance for it to come ahead and be one of the stronger builds that you see, depending on how we can scale the damage, especially since this skill just goes ahead and increases the damage by 40% and increases the area, potentially making it so that we can get screen-wide explosions, which you don't really see in a lot of other masteries. I wanted to just add a quick disclaimer for the upcoming build concept that we have here in the video. Everything that is in this build concept is subject to change depending on how patch notes are. There's a very, very good chance that I will not be playing this exact build that you see in this planner with the launch of the game. A lot of it is going to be changing and adjusting as to how I feel during the campaign and as to how patch notes go and how certain skills might seem really strong. With that being said, we'll get into it now. So now that we've gone over the individual skills of the Falconer, I wanted to give a brief idea on how I'm kind of planning to level the build on launch, and this might not be exactly what I end up doing, but I think it's a really cool concept on how you could potentially play the build. Of course, this depends on how patch notes fall out and if anything's buffed or nerfed or numbers are changed. We really don't know. If we get patch notes early and there's time, I might make a build guide if this build is still viable and I still feel like it's a strong way to level. So just a brief idea, it's going to be solely based around falconry and your falcon doing damage. So it is a minion build. The general idea is you're going to try to scale its damage through throwing damage, dexterity, and Shred Armor, which it'll apply itself, as well as crit and just increasing your damage through your skill stats alone. One of the main drawbacks to Falconry is its mana cost is very, very high, and it's very hard to sustain the mana. So the way I've kind of solved that is I went ahead and I'm going to spec into Shuriken. There's a lot of different ways to make Shuriken cost 0 mana. You can either just spec straight into Scintillant Steel here, and that makes it 0 mana. If you get one of the throwing damage nodes on your rings, which also lowers mana cost for throwing attacks, that solves its mana. So if you take Shuriken and you pair it up with the Sapping Strikes nodes on your rogue passive tree, you can get a lot of mana back very quickly, so that you can probably, my prediction is you can use the Falcon Strikes ability on cooldown without having any mana issues. Now, we don't know that for sure. We're going to have to wait and see. But I think it's going to be really strong. So that's the core of the build. You're spamming Falcon Strikes as much as you can. You're using Shurikens to get your mana back. From there, you're going to go ahead and you're going to shift to get through the map quickly and get through your echoes quick and the campaigns like as fast as possible. It's a really solid movement skill. And shift will also put shurikens around you. We are scaling throwing damage, so shurikens should do a decent amount. Other than that, it's a very standard shift tree. Make it invulnerable, get movement speed, lower its cooldown. You get dodge rating every time you shift. We have Smoke Bomb here. This is a pretty standard Smoke Bomb tree if you've played other rogue builds and you're experienced with the game. It's a very defensive Smoke Bomb tree. All we're doing is we're going ahead and we're picking up nodes that help us in some way for tankiness. Shrouded in Darkness gives us Glancing Blow, well, it gives us Dusk Shroud. Rapid Concealment makes the frequency in which we get the Dust Shroud stacks faster. It'll apply Slow, and then it'll apply Frailty. We're increasing its duration, and we're increasing the area that it covers. Now, if you are into party play, there are some nodes that are a little bit interesting. I would recommend taking points out of Generosity here. So if you are, say, playing with a group of players or a group of friends, you can take 2 points out of Generosity here, and you can apply those to Shared Concealment and Purging Fumes. What this will do is this will go ahead and this will make it so that if your allies are standing within your smoke screen, or your smoke bomb, they will get Dust Shroud stacks, so they will get tankier and they will get Glancing Blow chance, and it will make them cleanse their ailments, which is pretty standard and pretty strong for a lot of builds. You don't want to be bleeding, you don't want other forms of ailments such as shock or chill on you, or slow even. You can get rid of that. It's very, very strong, and it's very nice to have. There's also Silver Shroud. This makes it so you're guaranteed to dodge your next hit, and you'll gain ward. Overall, like I said, it's a very defensive tree. Use it to kind of just supplement defenses as you need and as you're gearing up. Finally, we're using Net. Now, the 5th skill here, I'm not necessarily positive it's going to be Net. It's pretty flexible. I think I'm going to start out by using Net just to try and feel out one of the new skills and see how I like it. What we have here is we're just using Net to debuff enemies, make it so they can't dodge Net, and they just can't dodge, and they can't avoid crits. We're making it so that Net slows. Once the Net is broken, they'll get slow stacks on them, so they'll be slowed for even longer. And then we're making it so Net buffs our Falcon's damage. It's a more damage multiplier, so this is a pretty significant amount of damage for our Falcon. Net will also cast Smoke Bomb after we jump with it, but we're making it so that it will no longer make us jump, so it won't be moving us around all over the place or backwards. It'll also drop Caltrops just as a little extra portion to it. Caltrops can slow, apply Frailty, depending on if you take nodes in your passive tree. And I think it's going to be a good utility skill. As for passives, Nothing is set in stone. I don't know exactly where I'm going to put my points in and in what order yet. I have a general idea, but I'm going to have to see while I'm leveling the build how I feel about different portions of the campaign. If I'm feeling squishy, I'm going to go ahead and pick up nodes that will increase my tankiness. If I feel like I'm lacking damage but I'm very tanky, I'll go ahead and just pick up damage nodes. The general idea, though, is for the rogue tree, it's a very standard rogue tree. Instead of Swift Assassin, I'm opting to take Steady Hand so that I get the dexterity and a little bit of life. Then we just take Guile so that we can grab Evasion. It's a solid rogue node. And then we have Agility for haste, chance on hit. And Sapping Strikes is so that we can maintain our mana. That is a very important part. This is probably one of the most important nodes on the tree for leveling. As for the rogue tree, we're grabbing a little bit of Glancing Blow chance, potentially more if I feel like I'm really strong and I have a ridiculous amount of damage or I don't need nearly as much damage as I have. I might drop some damage nodes to try and pick up more Glancing Blow throughout the trees. Other than that, more dex nodes as well as nodes that scale from dex. So per 2 dex, I gain +4 armor. If we end up scaling somewhere around 80, 90 armor or 90 dex, that's a good amount of armor that we're going to get, upwards of 180 flat armor, and then that also scales because increased armor on Falcon hit. Falcon is going to be attacking quite rapidly, and it's recently, so it stacks for 4 seconds. I don't know if this will multiplicatively stack or how it will stack exactly. We'll have to see when patch notes come out or when the game is live, but I think this is going to be a really solid node. Other than that, it's just flat throwing damage for the Falcon, flat melee damage, and different ways to buff Falcon. Avian Hurl is another important node. It makes it so that our Falcon is going to scale off of our throwing damage. So, throwing damage like flat throwing on rings or flat throwing on gloves will also scale our Falcon. Very strong, a lot of scaling, a lot of different kind of moving wheels in the build. A lot of things that kind of compound onto each other to scale our Falcon's damage. Other than that, it's just haste, movement speed to try and get through quickly. I will have a link to the planner in the description of the video. It's just a brief idea. It's subject to change. So that about does it for my first impressions on the Falconer Mastery. I'm really excited to play this Mastery on launch, and I think 11th Hour Games did a fantastic job designing this class, and I really want to give a special thank you to 11th Hour Games for allowing me to do this video and giving me this opportunity. If you're interested in picking up Last Epoch, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description to my Nexus store where you can purchase the game and support me as well for no added cost. There's 3 different versions of the game that each have their own cosmetic benefits, and these will be available, as far as I understand, after launch. The only pre-order exclusive part is the little guppy pet here, the golden guppy, which, I mean, it's pretty fantastic. This is my first attempt at making a YouTube video, and I hope to bring you more in the future for Last Epoch specifically. I really loved this game. If you have any questions about the game, my build concept in the video, or simply just want to give me some constructive criticism on the video, please leave a comment, or you can catch me live on Twitch. The link for that will also be in the description, so feel free to stop by and just give me your either advice or just to say hey. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all racing through the monoliths on the 21st as well.